Ding! Seconds out. Joe Rogan challenges Dr. Peter Hotez to debate RFK on the subject of vaccines. Is this thirst for combative discourse due to science being treated as dogma during the pandemic? Is there about to be an explosion of conflict around science? What is science for anyway? Hello there, you 6.4 million awakening wonders. Thanks for joining me on this voyage towards truth and freedom, which will involve taking opinions from a variety of sources and bringing about synthesis. At least that's what I believe. Let me know what you believe in the comments and hit that notification bell, ding ding, once more, because we need you to know when we make this content. The world is changing fast. During the pandemic period, there plainly was censorship. It's now been admitted that true information was censored, shut down, taken off social media sites.
Asked for a bunch of things to be censored that in retrospect ended up being debatable or true.
In order, in fact, to ensure that a prevailing mentality went unchallenged. Because of powerful media figures like Joe Rogan being able to bypass the attempts of the mainstream to censor them, we now live in a different space. Elon Musk owns Twitter now. He's got a different attitude towards centralized power and authoritarianism.
And what about the fact that the BBC was put under pressure by the British government to change its editorial policy? Are you aware of that?
Whether you love Elon Musk or loathe him, you have to acknowledge that he is facilitating a different type of debate. Enter into this conversation RFK, a politician with a powerful surname and very strong views on certain medications. The establishment now cannot avoid conversation, discourse, and debate without censorship, without smearing, without shutting down conversations on the basis of it being misinformation or malinformation. But why has it become so contentious? Why has it become so combative? Let me know in the comments what exactly you feel about the ongoing debate around medications and restrictions and regulations that were implemented during the pandemic period. Let's have a look at this Twitter spat, this Twitter brawl, this Twitter rumble, and see, can we have grown-up adult conversations in good faith that are directed towards finding mutually beneficial solutions that take into account that science is often a subset of capitalism and commercial incentives, that the state has been negligent in certain areas, but we have to be able to enter into good faith conversations where all sides are listened to appropriately. Let's have a look at Dr. Peter Hotez now on MSNBC show with Mehdi Hussein to see what claims he's made that have caused this furore to escalate to the point where it's become a global social media phenomena.
So the point is anti-vaccine disinformation.
As soon as I see the spectacles and the bow tie, I think this is not someone who can go toe-to-toe with Joe Rogan. Now, I know Joe Rogan is facilitating a potential debate that Dr. Peter Hotez is, it seems, potentially avoiding. What we want to be wary of on this channel is this conversation falling into tribalism and becoming overly energized, because actually what we're trying to deal with is information. You know we've had RFK on our show. You know I've been on Joe Rogan's show a bunch of times. We're still organizing our Elon Musk conversation, and I'm friendly with Mehdi Hussein. So many of the people involved in this I'm familiar with, friendly with. What we're keen to support is the possibility of a conversation about the efficacy of medication, the mainstream media's appetite for censorship, the possibility that the pharmaceutical industry needs to be radically regulated in a new way, and that the mainstream media needs to responsibly report on all sides of the conversation. He, Dr. Peter Hotez, he's just another human being. He's not the living totem pole of the system's desire to vaccinate. I'm sure he's got very particular perspectives. I understand that maybe he's got an autistic kid, has he? I mean, that you've got to be kind of sympathetic towards him on that basis. Doesn't he advocate for vaccines being available without patent in territories where they aren't being overly commercialized and they're not unduly profitable? We don't need to get into a situation where we victimize any individual, although culturally, I guess it's pretty obvious that I've more in common with RFK and Elon Musk when it comes to this particular issue. But what's more important than those kind of affiliations and that kind of natural affinity is good faith conversations. Where we have to get to is the point where you sort of calmly, patiently listen to people that you disagree with and then present your perspective on the situation. What is assumed at the moment is we live in a system where both sides want to seize control and annihilate the other side, whether that's the Democrats and Republicans in American politics, even though both sides are owned by the same corporate interests. And even around this vaccine debate, I think a lot of people feel they were shut down during the pandemic period. Like those of us that were like, whoa, are we getting a bit carried away here? Isn't this like like an opportunity to profit and an opportunity to regulate. There was all sorts of conversations that weren't talked about. What about natural immunity? What about vitamin D? Shouldn't we be eating well and doing exercise? And Joe Rogan was carrying a lot of those messages as a result of conversations with experts. So I imagine he feels somewhat frustrated. Then someone like RFK, him being dismissed as a sort of a wackadoodle, I guess he's going to be pretty antagonistic. So both sides have at different points engaged in the conversation in rhetorical ways that are not advantageous to a beneficial, agreeable consensus being achieved. We can't be flag waving and snarling and teeth baring with something as important as this. This isn't about victory for a side. This is about victory for humanity.
And I offered to come and go on Joe Rogan again. I've been on a couple of times and have that discussion with him, but not to turn it into the Jerry Springer show with having RFK Jr. on.
It's sad because I said I'm so fed up with the debate me. You've already spoken and written about COVID vaccines. I think you've been on MSNBC and other channels hundreds of times since the start of the pandemic.
That somewhat glosses over the plain, observable fact that during the period between the end of 2019 to where we are now, there have been a good many revelations about the nature of the vaccines, their efficacy, and regulations that were taken during lockdown that have been disproven, challenged, debated, among them most notably that the mainstream media and social media participated with the state and state agencies in censoring and controlling the narrative. If you want to take that in the most optimistic way, in order that we all are protected and kept safe. But, you know, if you're a person that doubts the motives of the state and corporations, the whole thing becomes a little more complex. Wouldn't it be nice to see Mehdi Hussein say, look, let's be honest, since the beginning of the pandemic, it's become pretty clear that many things that were said on this very channel were not true, and that people like Joe Rogan were vilified. And RFK, who's a valid voice, who's done a lot of research into this subject and written a best-selling book, ought to be included in the conversation. And it's plain that people are trying to shut down those kind of contributions. Everyone just doubles down on their own side the whole time. You never hear these types of media outlets go, we shouldn't have said ivermectin is a horse paste. That discredited us. We look foolish because of that. We shouldn't have done that. We shouldn't have made claims about the vaccine that were not proven and have subsequently been disproven. We shouldn't have done that. We should have acknowledged that it wasn't true. We should be open about looking at the negative impact of lockdown. We shouldn't have had Don Lemon say, yes, we should shame the unvaccinated, until you get a clear mea culpa. That's what tribalism and oppositionism leads to. A kind of aggressive, testosterone-fueled judgment when what might be better is a little yielding open-mindedness and observation of what the actual target and what the actual intentions are.
And I would say, I don't know if you've agreed to debate or not. My advice is not to, and people might find that surprising because I wrote a book about debate. But I just think there's a time and a place for a debate.
The time and the place for debate is situations where we get to propagate one particular view and we don't have to acknowledge mistakes and errors that have been made. But I would say a conversation between someone like RFK, who, to use the British phrase, knows his onions, someone like Peter Hotez, who's clearly scientifically grounded, would be valuable if it was done in the right spirit. And my personal opinion, Joe Rogan's exactly the person to curate such a debate because he's shown that he's for real. The thing that he does, he's done when there was no money in it. He's kept doing it. He's listened to voices from both sides. He's remained consistent. I think he's a reliable person. He's not doubling down and advocating for a particular point of view. That's my opinion, but I've got my own biases, obviously. Let me know in the comments if you agree. We can't keep making this fantastic content without reliable sponsors. Look at this commercial for one of them now. Look how funny I've made it, for God's sake. Is it me? Or does the future feel more insecure and uncertain? Wars, pandemics, lies, trickery. My cats keep having kittens. The last one's personal. For those who are in the United States, there is a way to secure your hard-earned nest egg. American Hartford Gold make it easy to protect your savings and retirement accounts with physical gold and silver. With one phone call, they can have physical gold and silver delivered right to your door, or inside a qualifying retirement account like your IRA or 401k. American Hartford Gold is the highest rated firm in the US with an A+ rating from the BBB and thousands of satisfied clients. Right now, they will give you up to $5,000 of free silver on your first qualifying order. This offer is only for US customers. Call 866-505-8315. That's 866-505-8315, or simply text BRAND to 998899. Get up to $5,000 of silver and protect your future in this crazy, crazy world with some solid precious metals literally made in stars.
I don't think a historian of World War II should debate a Holocaust denier. That's my analogy here. Like, I don't think these debates between experts and cranks do anything other than elevate the cranks.
Creating the category of expert and crank is part of the problem. People do not like, above all else, this I have learned, elitism. The idea that your opinion doesn't matter. Shut up. Because guess what? The people that were saying that were wrong about so many vital issues that they've discredited almost the concept of being an expert. Because an expert that is funded by certain financial interests, that operates to support and lobby for certain financial interests, isn't really an expert at all. It's just an object of the new orthodoxy that promulgates a particular message. Science has to be an ongoing discourse that incorporates information from both sides. This, perhaps above all else, is a subject that does need to be debated, because here's what I believe: the pandemic was exploited and utilized in order to create opportunities to regulate and profit. Not saying that the pandemic wasn't a real thing, it was exploited. The same way that every crisis is exploited. That's a piece of long-standing left-wing analysis. Crisis, response, solution.
But in science, we don't typically do debates. What we do is we write scientific papers, we present our findings in front of a critical audience of our peers to solicit their input and suggestions. But one doesn't typically debate science.
What type of science are we talking about when Pfizer lobbied to have the information concealed and not revealed for 75 years? What kind of science do you have when increasingly people think that this virus emerged from a scientific laboratory in Wuhan that was funded by scientific interests in the United States of America? Science itself, of course, means the analysis of data through experimentation and verification. It's not the meaning of the word science that's being debated, it's the authenticity of the type of science that's been deployed in the last few years to legitimize authoritarianism and profiteering. Let me know in the comments if you agree.
Maybe the one-off discussion of evolution versus creationism and that sort of thing, but that's not what we do in science.
Even there, what's being doubled down on is a kind of materialistic worldview that has in it the exact elitism that people are getting sick of. That's why debate and conversation is important. Only the studies that are funded are getting done. The way that the information is presented is often dubious. Sometimes trials are carried out numerous times. And the FDA, for example, the regulatory body of the pharmaceutical industries in the United States, is funded to the tune of 75% at least by those pharmaceutical companies. So to suggest that science is a catch-all way of denying corruption or potential opposition is exactly the same way that the church 500 years ago would have said, yeah, but God says it's wrong. It's just the use of an authoritarian symbol to shut down debate. And that is literally the problem. Dr. Peter Hotez, the Dean of the National School of Tropical Medicine at Baylor College of Medicine, told MSNBC's Mehdi Hassan that he'd been the target of an overwhelming harassment campaign since the tres hombres of RFK Jr, Joe Rogan and Elon Musk ganged up to pressure him into a live debate over the safety and efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines. Dr. Hotez said the attacks from the anti-vaccine lobby included physical stalking and incessant threatening emails. If you want to talk about an anti-vaccine lobby, do you also want to talk about a vaccine lobby? If you want to talk about bullying, do you want to talk about Don Lemon's rhetoric around shaming or the ivermectin horse paste debacle on CNN? It's okay to say stuff like that, to make those kind of accusations. There's no doubt that Joe Rogan is a powerful individual personally and now culturally, and the same can be said of Elon Musk and RFK in various ways also. But to delegitimize their request for a debate on the basis of bullying and lobbying without acknowledging that bullying and lobbying was one of the key problems that defined the pandemic period is disingenuous. My main point is, imagine yourself on the other side of the argument. Think about the thing you believe. Like, it's pretty clear what side I'm on, culturally and ideologically and just through affinity, affiliation and personal history. But what I'm trying to think is Dr. Peter Hotez is a human being. I'm trying to think everyone is just like me, trying to do their best in the world. These like nitpicky, contentious issues have to be approached open-heartedly. How are we going to get somewhere? And I don't believe that the mainstream media, the pharmaceutical industry, big tech and the state, particularly with its globalist tendencies, has behaved in a good faith way in the last few years. I think the intention has been opportunistic regulation and opportunistic profiteering. And that has to be confronted, and having a conversation about that is a perfectly good way to air those issues. The stuff online is just total wackadoodle. And let's face it, when you have RFK RFK Jr. and Joe Rogan and Elon Musk all tag teaming those tres hombres at the same time, he told MSNBC. That probably includes just about every follower on Twitter, so it's pretty overwhelming. But it was also pretty overwhelming when the FBI was censoring information that was true. It was pretty overwhelming when Joe Rogan was subject to just an all-pervading media attack because he said, I got better in 3 days. It was literally an immersive experience. Information was censored, discredited, called conspiracy theories. So it's extraordinary, actually, to see these type of arguments advanced at this time. What they're advancing now is what they should have considered then. Are we being bullying? Are we just responding to lobbying? Are we shutting down conversation? Are we victimizing individuals, shaming them even when we should be listening? Let me know in the comments. The saga began after Dr. Hotez shared a Vice article that debunked the orgy of unchecked vaccine misinformation by RFK Jr. and Rogan during a 3-hour interview last week. So in a sense, Dr. Hotez invited this. It's not like it was an unsolicited attack. He went, this is bunk and hokum and nonsense. Here's a rebuttal. On Saturday, Rogan challenged the world-renowned vaccine expert to debate COVID vaccines with RFK Jr. Peter, if you claim what RFK Jr. is saying is misinformation, I'm offering you $100,000 to the charity of your choice if you're willing to debate him on my show with no time limit, he tweeted. Hotez replied he was prepared to come on Rogan's podcast to have a meaningful discussion. Some people say there was another tweet that was deleted before eventually saying he would join. So like even this piece of text that we're using is biased. Look, Mr. Musk then joined in on the pylon, right? So this is framing the information in a particular way. He's afraid of public debate because he knows he's wrong. I don't know, man. You can say that's joining a pylon. Have there been pylons during the pandemic period? Have there been people that have been condemned and criticized? There has to be principle and values. There have to be. Otherwise, none of this stuff's going to work. Either you believe it's wrong to have a pylon, or you don't like pylons when you're being piled on, but you like piling on others. You've got to have values. If you have no values, you're in trouble. In an interview on Sunday night, Dr. Hotez said the claim that he was a shield for Big Pharma was exasperating. I make low-cost, patent-free vaccines for low and middle-income countries that led to 100 million doses being administered in India and Indonesia. No patents, minimal strings attached. So we actually found a way to bypass the pharma companies, and yet RFK Jr. incessantly calls me a pharma shill. If you believe that vaccines are part of the solution, and of course a lot of people do, then ensuring that people have access to them, you'd say is a good thing and a righteous thing. So again, it's interesting to approach information like this in an unbiased and open-hearted way, and not to rely on simplistic tropes about good and bad, because I think life's a bit more complicated than that. In January, the World Health Organization released a video in which Hotez claimed anti-vaccine activism is more dangerous than terrorism, nuclear proliferation, and gun violence. Yeah, the WHO did do that. We covered that. That's up on our channel. We have to recognize that anti-vaccine activism, which I actually call anti-science aggression, has now become a major killing force globally, said Hotez. Well, that's the kind of thing that does shut down debate and conversation, and I would strongly disagree with that. Anti-science aggression is worse than terrorism. So that's an interesting set of ideas to conflate. Let me know in the comments if you think that's helpful to a necessary global conversation where there are scars that need to be healed. Even in the most contentious issues, I believe conversation can't hurt. That's how we advance. Otherwise, we're just going to ossify our oppositionist positions, no? Meanwhile, YouTube's war against RFK Jr. continues as the big tech platform has now deleted a 90-minute podcast starring Kennedy in conversation with Canadian psychologist Dr. Jordan Peterson, which encompassed topics from climate change to COVID-19 measures. So what we have here is a social media furore around a vital, significant and defining issue of the last 3 years, which encompasses big pharma, censorship, state power, who has the right to control and censor information. You know the kind of stories we cover here on this platform, and you know where we stand on globalism, the power and influence of big pharma that they're able to exert through donations. Imagine if big pharma was independently regulated and they were unable to make donations to the political class and they were unable to sponsor media. Do you imagine then you might get a less biased conversation on these subjects? Would they be interesting regulations to introduce? Then perhaps what you would have is an environment where people could talk about science appropriately, in the right way. What does your experimentation reveal? What doesn't it reveal? Where is there still room for conjecture? Where is there still room for individual freedom? I would argue that unless you're genuinely and legitimately building a society where it's acknowledged and understood by all that we're all participating together in a global organism and we all love one another, that would include radical changes economically to be able to say, well, look, we've all got to undertake these measures because, as you know, our society is based on fairness and unity. You can see that in our political systems. You can see it in our financial systems. You can see it in the way that conflicts are resolved. You can see that in the way that democracy and elections are conducted. Unless you've got that kind of society, you have to recognize that this is a quite tribalized society where people are entitled to have different views, where communities should have decentralized, democratic, localized institutions by which they run themselves. And in such an environment, environment, debate and conversation should be encouraged. The only people that benefit from closing down debate and conversation are those that seek to control the narrative. And usually they're not seeking to control the narrative in order to protect you, but in order to control you. Protection and control are starting to intersect. I think that's one of the main things we learned during the pandemic. People that are saying they're going to protect you want to control you. That doesn't mean that science isn't legitimate. That doesn't mean that great work isn't being done. That doesn't mean that there aren't perfectly reasonable, brilliant people on both sides of almost any conversation. It just means we've forgotten that. We've forgotten that in order to have a debate, you have to approach people with an open hand and an open heart in good faith and be willing to listen to views that you don't like. You have to be willing to afford other people their freedom. But that's just what I think. Why don't you let me know what you think in the comments? Let me know what side of this conversation you're on. Let me know where you stand. Let me know if you're willing to approach people in good faith and without judgment. If you enjoyed this video, have a look at either of these. Give the video a like and remember to comment. It really helps us. We're on every day on Rumble, and my comedy special Brandemic, in which I talk about these things in depth, humorously, is available now. It premieres on the 25th of June. It's self-made, uncensored. You'll love it. More important than any of that is that you please stay free.